During the summer of 1991, 16-year-old Laurie Show had no idea when she agreed to go on a couple of dates with 20-year-old Lawrence Butch Yunkin that her life would become an unending barrage of abusive phone calls, physical altercations, and fear. Laurie Show was by all accounts a typical American teenager, the only child born to John and Hazel Show on January 27, 1975. In 1991, Laurie lived with her mother Hazel in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Laurie, who was 16 at the time, attended Conestoga Valley High School, where she was a sophomore. She was looking forward to getting her driver's license and hoped to become a nurse or a hairdresser someday. 19-year-old Lisa Michelle Lambert, who went by her middle name Michelle, had dropped out of school at 15. She dyed her naturally brown hair platinum blonde and wore blue-tinted contacts. In 1991, she was living with her boyfriend Butch after being kicked out of her home for allegedly stealing money. She was also pregnant with Butch's child. Lawrence Yunkin, who went by Butch, was a 20-year-old roofer and part-time lumberyard worker. He lived in a trailer on the other side of town. He hung around the public swimming pool and the bowling alley. According to Lambert, she met Butch at a public swimming pool in 1990. After a few dates, Michelle claimed he SA'd her in a van parked in front of her parents' home. Michelle claimed that due to her family's strict Christian beliefs, she believed it would be better to stay with the boy who'd SA'd her but might marry her. Michelle says Butch controlled every aspect of her life. He told her what to wear, wouldn't allow her to learn to drive, and also refused to allow her to return to high school. The couple fought frequently. Michelle says Butch beat her regularly. The couple broke up briefly during the summer of 1991, and that's when Butch met Laurie Show. Laurie and Butch had only gone out on 2 dates that summer. Allegedly on their last date, Butch had date SA'd Laurie in his truck. Following this incident, Butch and Michelle, who was pregnant with his child, got back together. However, their reconciliation only made Michelle furious at Laurie. Lambert began stalking and harassing Laurie. In July 1991, Lambert devised a plan to humiliate Laurie. With the help of several other teenagers, Lambert wanted to lure Laurie out of her home, cut off her hair, and tie her to a pole. The plan wasn't successful because 2 of the girls warned Laurie. On August 20th, 1991, Hazel reported that Lambert, quote, came up and started screaming and yelling all kinds of obscenities and just being very vicious, end quote, while she was with Laurie at a store. Hazel went on to recall that among the things Lambert yelled was an accusation that Laurie and Butch had sex. Hazel countered that Yunkin had SA'd Laurie and that they may press charges against him, which they did report to police on July 31st, 1991. On the surface, it would appear that jealousy is what fueled Lambert's rage. However, I believe that was only one element. Yunkin, it seemed, was afraid he would be sent to jail for SA'ing Laurie. He encouraged Lambert and 17-year-old Tabitha Buck, who had just moved to Pennsylvania from Oregon, to beat Laurie up. Over the summer, Lambert regularly taunted and humiliated Laurie. After an incident that occurred in November 1991, where Lambert attacked Laurie and banged her head into a truck several times, Hazel not only reported the incident to local authorities, she changed their home phone number. Hazel had even tried to get an order of protection against Lambert. Even though Lambert told Laurie that she, quote, had friends that would take care of Laurie, end quote, and that she would kill her. Unfortunately, simple assault was considered a low-priority case. An investigation into the incident didn't even begin until December 16, 1991. A friend of Lambert's tipped her off 2 days later that the police were looking for her as a result of the Show family pressing charges against her and Yunkin. On Thursday, December 19, 1991, Hazel Show received a call from the school's guidance counselor asking if she could meet with them concerning Laurie. Hazel agreed to meet at 7 a.m. the following day, December 20th, 1991. There was no meeting, and the call had been made to lure Hazel out of the apartment, leaving Laurie home alone. Yunkin drove Lambert and Buck to the apartment complex and dropped them off once they saw Hazel leave that morning. Yunkin then went to a nearby McDonald's. Tabitha Buck knocked on the door. When Laurie answered, she and Lambert forced their way inside. Buck and Lambert were armed with a knife from the home Lambert shared with Yunkin, a rope, and the pair were wearing black knit hats that Lambert had bought at Kmart the day before. What occurred next depends on who is telling it. Buck says it was Lambert who slit Laurie's throat while she sat on her legs. Lambert claims it was Buck and Yunkin who actually killed Laurie. Meanwhile, Hazel had arrived at the school only to discover that not only was the counselor not there, but there was no record of an appointment. Hazel left the school and returned home, expecting to find Laurie inside getting ready for the last day of school before the Christmas break. As Hazel left her car, heading towards her apartment, she was stopped by a panicked neighbor. The neighbor asked Hazel if something was wrong because she heard some suspicious noises. Hazel rushed inside the apartment. What she saw is the stuff of nightmares. Laying on the floor, covered in blood and with a rope around her neck, Laurie, Hazel's only daughter, was dying. She rushed into the kitchen for a knife to cut the rope. Once the rope had been cut, Laurie breathed deeply as Hazel held her. Hazel asked Laurie who had attacked her. "Michelle did it," Laurie said. Those were the last words Hazel would ever hear her daughter speak. Police and paramedics were called, but it was too late. 16-year-old Laurie Show died in her mother's arms. The investigation seemed pretty straightforward for detectives. After arriving on the scene, detectives noted it had all of the signs of an intense struggle. There were clumps of hair on the floor and the telephone was off the hook. At the autopsy, the medical examiner found several bruises on Laurie's head, the result of blunt force trauma. There were 3 cuts on her back, the result of stab wounds from a knife. One wound had penetrated her right lung. There were 2 wounds on her legs. There was a cut on her thigh that was so deep it went to her pelvis. The wound to her throat was the result of at least 3 cuts with a knife. There were 21 cuts to Laurie's hands, thought to be defensive wounds. The medical examiner concluded Laurie's cause of death was exsanguination. The wounds to her neck and back were fatal. He would later testify that Laurie had lived probably about 30 minutes after the attack. He would go on to say that despite the wound to her neck, Laurie would have been able to speak, albeit, quote, not in a regular tone, but a whispering, mumbling, intelligibly enough for someone who was close to this person to understand what she was saying, end quote. A neighbor was interviewed who recalled hearing the front door slam above him, followed by a scream and a thump on the floor of the bedroom. Next, he heard a door slam about 6 to 8 minutes later. He said it was about between 7:10 and 7:12, and he looked out the window to witness 2 people of equal height, approximately 5'7", exit the stairwell. The witness interview, coupled with Hazel Show repeating her daughter's dying words, prompted investigators to locate Yunkin, Lambert, and Buck. The trio was located at a local bowling alley and brought in for questioning. Following the advice of her attorney, 17-year-old Tabitha Buck did not give a statement. Butch Yunkin told police that he had dropped the two girls off that morning and then went to a nearby McDonald's. He returned approximately 15 minutes later and picked up Lambert and Buck from a field near the complex. Butch told Michelle and Tabitha they, quote, smelled funny. So the three of them headed to the trailer he shared with Lambert, where the two girls showered. Their bloody clothes were washed and then placed in a pink garbage bag. The blood-stained clothing was thrown in a dumpster. Yunkin then dropped Buck off at school. Lambert and Yunkin then disposed of the knife in a nearby lake. Lambert changed her story multiple times. Initially, she denied everything, even lying about the clothing she'd been wearing. Once confronted with what Yunkin had told law enforcement, Lambert eventually settled on the following version of events. Tabitha and Michelle had gone to Laurie's apartment so that Michelle could speak to Laurie. Buck knocked on the door because Laurie and her mother would recognize Lambert and not open the door. Lambert goes on to claim she entered the apartment after she heard someone answer and the door shut. Once inside, she found Tabitha struggling with Laurie. Buck attacked Sho with a knife. Lambert claims she just stood there because she was so scared. Lambert said she, quote, couldn't look anymore, and I turned away. Based on what Yunkin had told police, the clothes and the knife used were located right where Yunkin said they would be. Lambert, Yunkin, and Buck were all arrested and charged with murder. Lisa Michelle Lambert waived her right to have a jury trial. Her case was heard by Lancaster County Judge Lawrence Stengel. Lambert's ex-boyfriend, Butch Yunkin, in exchange for a 1-year prison term, testified against her. Yunkin told the trial judge that Lambert said Tabitha Buck and Laurie Sho were wrestling and Laurie was accidentally stabbed in the back, resulting in a hissing sound as if her lung had been punctured. Lambert said she and Buck agreed to slit Laurie's throat, quote, to put her out of her misery. However, Yunkin testified, Lambert never told him if the pair went through with it. On July 20th, 1992, Lambert was convicted of first-degree murder and criminal conspiracy. The judge sentenced her to life without parole. Stengel said he decided against the death penalty due to Lambert's youth. He felt she could still contribute in a positive way to her daughter's life, even if it was from behind bars. Lambert had given birth while awaiting trial. Her parents adopted her. Tabitha Buck's trial was next. Initially, her defense team filed a request asking for Buck to be tried as a juvenile. However, at the end of July 1992, her defense team withdrew the request and prosecutors decided not to seek the death penalty. Buck's trial was moved from Lancaster County to the city of Easton in Lehigh County. Tabitha Buck's trial lasted 8 days. Yunkin also testified against her. On October 1st, 1992, the jury convicted Buck of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Buck filed appeals immediately. Her appeals process lasted approximately 3 years and were all unsuccessful. After he had testified in both Lambert's and Buck's trials, it was determined that Butch Yunkin had committed perjury, due in part to what would later be referred to as the 29 Questions letter. The letter, asking 29 questions, was written by Lambert while she was in jail awaiting trial and sent to Yunkin while he was also in jail. Yunkin claimed his handwriting had been forged, but a handwriting expert testified the answers were in Butch's handwriting. One of the items contained in the letter was Yunkin's response of yes to Lambert writing, quote, "I know I am not an angel, Lawrence, but I never got mad enough to kill," end quote. Yunkin's plea deal was revoked and he was convicted of third-degree murder and sentenced to 10 to 20 years. In 1994, the appellate court ruled The physical findings at the crime scene, the testimony at the trial, including Hazel Show's trial testimony, the history of ill will between the victim and the defendant, and the circumstantial evidence developed at the trial, the conviction is upheld. In 1996, Lambert files a lawsuit claiming prison guard James Eicher attacked her 6 times during 1994, and another official fondled her. She claims she was videotaped during a strip search. Eicher was convicted of indecent assault and sentenced to 2 years in prison. In 1997, Lambert was free for 10 months after a federal judge ruled she was actually innocent. The Federal Appeals Court overturned the ruling, however, and Lambert was returned to prison. The federal court found that Lambert had brought her case before exhausting all opportunities for appeal at the state level. Lambert was given a retrial. She was again found guilty. In 1998, her conviction was upheld, and Lambert's assertion that she was framed by the prosecutors was rejected. She filed a request for release during her appeal, and she was denied. In 2003, the 8 law enforcement officers accused of misconduct by Lambert were cleared. In 2005, Lambert appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court refused to hear her case, and Lambert is incarcerated in Clinton, New Jersey. All of her appeals have been exhausted. In 2007, a Lancaster County judge determines that the civil lawsuit filed by Lambert against State Correctional Institution Cambridge Springs administrators for failing to protect her from being abused by employees will be heard by a jury. Pennsylvania settles the lawsuit for $35,000 to pay court costs, restitution, and the remainder would go to Lambert's parents for raising her and Yunkin's daughter. Lambert is currently incarcerated at Massachusetts Correctional Institute at Framingham. She has earned her GED as well as earning a college degree. Lambert no longer goes by her middle name Michelle, opting instead to go by her true first name Lisa. Her platinum blonde hair is now back to its natural brown. She's written a book titled Love, Murder, and Corruption in Lancaster County. Critics say the book is missing more than a few critical details. On November 22, 2017, after the Supreme Court ruled to ban mandatory life sentences for juveniles, Tabitha Buck was resentenced to a term of 28 years to life. Tabitha Buck was granted parole December 21, 2009. In 2003, Lawrence Butch Yunkin was released on parole after his 3rd attempt. He served 12 years. He moved back to Lancaster County and was a regular bowler at the bowling alley he frequented with Lambert and Buck until the bowling alley burned down one summer. Hazel Show remarried, but the couple is now divorced. She still lives in the apartment where Laurie was murdered. After Laurie's murder, Hazel started campaigning for stronger anti-stalking laws in Pennsylvania. New anti-stalking laws went into effect June 1993.